just out of curiosity, is everybody here a grand? Raise your hand if you're a grand as opposed to a parent.
We're great-grand.
And great, oh, I'm sorry. If you're a grand, great-grand, or great-great. If any of you are great-great-grand, somebody rub the cradle. Okay. So, well, welcome. My name is Lisa Rudy, and so this is just kind of about me, but I have a son who is on the autism spectrum, and he was diagnosed at about the age of 3, and he was born in 1999. I'm a professional writer, and I have been for many, many years.
96.
What did I say?
99.
Sorry. My daughter was born in 99. My son was born in 96. So I'm so sorry. So Tom, anyway, as a professional writer, it never even occurred to me, so I'm doing all this research into this subject. Gosh, I could make money at this. So this was back in the Wild West days of the internet, and being a parent who was a serious researcher was enough to give me an opportunity to be the About.com guide to autism, and that kind of took me on a trajectory so that I've been writing on the subject and researching and had opportunities to do some really exciting work over the years. So in addition to having a 27-year-old son on the spectrum, which is, I've written a book about autism in the community, which is called Get Out, Explore, and Have Fun. And created a summer camp program for kids on the spectrum back in Pennsylvania. And then over the years, both my husband and I come out of the museum world. And I started to see some opportunities for inclusion of kids on the spectrum, and adults as well, in museums. So I've done a lot of consulting on that topic, and I'm now working with some museums out in autism to welcome autistic individuals to their community sites. And in addition to that, I've done some creation of courses on the topic. I've worked with and interviewed some of the top people, and then I've written extensively on the subject, not only for the web, but also for some print outlets as well. So that's kind of my background. And what I'm going to do today, I want to start by asking you guys a little bit about what you are here to find out. I have a prepared talk, but I want to be sure that what I'm saying is what you need to hear. So does anybody, just raise your hand, does anybody have any, okay, yeah, in particular that you'd like to know?
I have an 18-year-old granddaughter who's on the spectrum. She's completed high school. She's very bright, but she kind of panics easily, and noise is difficult for her. Her social skills aren't great. And right now she's kind of in limbo as to what kind of, when a question about being independent or work or how her future is going to go. And so those are the kind of concerns that, this is my granddaughter, so I'm worried about.
And I can talk about that a little bit today, and I'm going to do another talk that's specific to teens and adults on the spectrum. So that's going to be a whole different topic. And I should also, by the way, preface this by saying, as you heard, I'm a mom, I'm a writer, I'm a researcher. I've been in the field long enough to know a fair amount about the subject, but I'm not a therapist or a doctor. So there's a certain amount that I can recommend, but please don't take my word as, oh yes, that's what the doctor said. Anybody else have anything specific? Yeah.
My question would be, if they're nonverbal, in your experience, is that usually forever, or do a lot of people, or do a lot of these kids start talking at a certain age?
How old is this particular kid?
3.
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. I mean, there are certainly people who grow up to be nonverbal and autistic, but what I learned is that if they start using something like sign language or picture boards, and you sort of have the sense that, well, they're going to rely on that and not speak, actually, apparently, according to the research, it actually encourages speech. And we've also had the experience that what a lot of these kids do is they start echoing words rather than coming up with their own words. And after a while, for example, our son started, talking in SpongeBob's voice, but saying the thing that he wanted to say, kind of using somebody else's words instead of coming up with himself. And then over time, it kind of built and built and built. Speech therapy, of course, is always important. But yeah, very often. But it's all about communication, and I'll be talking about that. It almost doesn't matter whether it's speech or not, if that makes any sense. Okay, so let me start. So basically, I'm going to talk to you about autism so that you have an idea of really what it is and what it isn't. I'm going to talk a little bit also about some of the treatments that are out there, what works, what doesn't. So as you can see, the prevalence of autism has risen dramatically. This is the most recent, 2020, which is several years ago. It continues to rise. So it started as, in 04, which is not that long ago, really, as 1 in 166. Actually, now it's 1 in 36 people, I think, or some crazy number, is diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum. So, obviously, why is that happening? Is there really an increase in autism? Are there other things going on? There's obviously a lot of disagreement on this subject. There probably is an increase in autism. However, and I'll be talking about this, when we were kids, what we think of as autism today was completely different from what is described as autism was back in the day. It wasn't even in the diagnostic manual when we were kids. So it's not too surprising that the numbers have risen. If you say, well, we just invented this disorder, and tomorrow there's 150% increase in numbers, right? There's also a lot of new laws and supports available for kids on the spectrum. So there's definitely more of a desire to see kids diagnosed so that they can get those supports. The IDEA is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which requires schools to teach every kid and to provide them with the services they need. So that's very new since we were kids. Increased awareness. You all know about autism now. My guess is that 20 years ago it was on the very fringes of your world. Pediatricians know more about it. There is a possible cultural bias. It seems that there are way more white middle-class kids diagnosed with autism than kids of color, and part of that has to do with parents' desire to make sure their kids are getting that, but able to do it, have the time, have the, all of the tools available to make that happen as well. There may be, some environmental factors that are playing into this. It's not completely clear what they might be, and there's a lot of research into that, but I can't tell you for sure. Feel free to ask questions, by the way. Anybody have any words that pop into their head when they think about autism? Yeah.
Just the social, unable to really connect, establish relationships.
Yeah.
Limited.
Yeah.
Variety of I'll call it talents or behaviors.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
I think of a movie that was made, I forget the actor's name, but
Might it be Dustin Hoffman?
Dustin Hoffman. Yeah.
Rain Man,
He was
sure.
brilliant.
Rain Man was a very groundbreaking movie. Did everybody see Rain Man?
Yeah.
And actually the interesting thing is that the fellow who he was actually based on, his name was Kim Peek. He wasn't autistic. He had a different disorder that was very similar, but he was not actually autistic. But a lot of the behaviors you saw, there are people on the spectrum who have them. There are many who don't. So it's like everything else on the autism spectrum. It depends. It's always going to be the answer you're going to hear. So autism is a disorder. It's a developmental disorder. So it's in the same category as ADHD and Tourette's, and you can actually have autism and ADHD and Tourette's all at the same time. It's perfectly possible. And you can also have learning disabilities. Sometimes people get multiple labels, even though autism kind of covers all of them, but that's not unusual. It's a spectrum disorder, and that means, in essence, you can be a little autistic or very, very autistic. But it's really not as simple as that, because if you think about it, even if you're a little autistic and you're able to be, as somebody was talking about their 18-year-old, okay, well, that's great, you made it through high school. How much support do you need to get to the next level? And the answer may be a lot. Even though you're capable and you're smart, Signs must appear before age 3. This is a tricky one because the signs may appear, but they may be mild enough that nobody says anything or really, notices it until they're 8 or 10. So when a kid appears to be autistic, or an adult appears to be autistic in an older age, the person doing the evaluation will want to delve back into their childhood to see if this really started when they were a child, a very young child. If it didn't, they may have a lot of other issues, but it probably isn't autism per se. There is no medical test for autism. So every person who is diagnosed on the basis of interviews and observation. So it depends to a degree on who's doing the observing, right? So in some cases, somebody will say, oh, no, they don't have autism, they have ADHD. And somebody else may say the opposite because there's a lot of overlap, particularly, again, with people who are more high functioning. So let's see. Autism is not a disease. It's not a sickness. It's not a mental illness. A person with autism can be mentally ill, but those are two completely separate things. A lot of people with autism have anxiety or depression, and very often that's because they have been treated with such, they've been bullied, or they have a lot of anxiety because they're uncomfortable in new situations, but it's not the same thing as the autism. It's not, as I said, diagnosable with a medical test. It doesn't get worse over time. And for many people, it gets a lot better in that they learn a lot of skills and they're able to do a lot more than, if you look at some kids, you think, oh my goodness, how could they possibly? And then you look at them as adults and you say, oh wow, they've come a long way. That doesn't mean that they are no longer autistic, but it means that they've gained a huge number of skills that they didn't have, and they've probably found the right spot to be in for them. It's not life-threatening. Nobody with autism is in danger unless they do something dangerous than any of the rest of us. It's hard to define it, and it's not curable. There is no thing that cures autism. That's not to say that nobody who is autistic gets better. Most people do. Some people get so much better that they're almost indistinguishable from typical people, but they're usually doing hard work to be indistinguishable. So all that makes sense.
Yes.
Any questions so far? Yeah.
Are there other disorders that are categorized on a spectrum, or is that unique to autism?
Like Down syndrome is as well, and I think there's quite a few actually. If you think about it, even I suspect even something like diabetes, you can have mild or you can have severe. With autism, it's a little weird because you can have kind of severe this but mild that symptom. So, you might have a whole lot of sensory issues and not be able to walk into a movie theater, but yet have be a very capable student. So this is my autism timeline, which blows my mind. Why autism did not exist when you were a kid. You never met anybody with autism when you were a kid, correct? Mm-hmm. Right? Because it didn't exist. That's why. It wasn't even invented. So in the 1930s, what we call profound or severe autism was identified as childhood schizophrenia. By the 1940s, it was called infantile autism, but it wasn't in the diagnostic manual. So if you brought your kid to the pediatrician, there was no such disorder in the diagnostic manual for them to have. It wasn't until the 1990s that the autism spectrum in any form was in the diagnostic manual. And that's not that long ago. And the entire autism spectrum was completely reconceived in 2013. So what you're seeing today is a very new description of a disorder that's been around for a long time, but it's so convoluted that of course it is new to us. And I should mention, I'm going to show you this. This is also kind of mind-blowing to me. So when my son was diagnosed, this was, around 2000, Pete? Yeah. There was in the DSM is a diagnostic manual. It is that book which professional therapists and practitioners use to describe any mental or developmental disorder. And it changes all the time. So, for example, for men, for a very long time, homosexuality was considered to be a disorder. Now it is not. But hoarding is. So if you were a hoarder in 2012, you were fine. And if you became, but in 2013, you had a disorder. And that's how it works. It's put together by a group of psychiatrists, and they make these decisions. So between the 1990s and 2013, there was this thing called autism spectrum disorders. And there were 5 possible disorders under it, right? So you've all heard of Asperger's syndrome, right? So that is a high-functioning form of autism. And if you've met somebody with Asperger's, you'll probably notice that they're very bright. They tend to talk fast, be anxious, be very techie, kind of nerdy. They might blurt out a lot, that kind of thing. That doesn't exist anymore. My son was diagnosed with PDD-NOS, which says high-functioning autism, although some people, it's kind of this catch-all for you don't quite fit in this category and you don't quite fit into that one. It was perfect for Tom, and I think it still is, to be perfectly honest. And then the autistic disorder, that's the more profound sort of classic autism that you've heard of. Rett syndrome is a very rare disorder that only affects girls. And childhood disintegrative order doesn't exist anymore as a diagnosis at all. There's also a genetic disorder called Fragile X, which is it's another rare disorder that has very similar symptoms. So these are the criteria. Now, I'm going to actually, I'll back it up a second. Okay, so in 2013, this group of psychiatrists got together and decided that they didn't want all these categories. They wanted to put it all into one great big lump of people who are called people on the autism spectrum, which includes everybody from the most brilliant to somebody who has a very low IQ and is unable to communicate and is in diapers for their whole lives. So we're talking about a very big spectrum. And these are the criteria for being autistic. And what you'll probably notice, at least I notice, is that a lot of these criteria are very vague. So deficits in social emotional reciprocity, what does that look like? And they do, of course, have tools to define that, but when you start to look at these, you find, I at least find myself thinking, according to who? Because it's not an easy thing to define. But you'll see, so all of these, social communication and interaction is number one, and you must have all of these deficits. And what you really need to have are deficits that aren't enough that it impacts your ability to just live your life. So it can't just be, she's kind of shy. It has to be way beyond that. But how far beyond and in what way, really an expert is going to look at and do observations, do questionnaires, and determine. But the social issues are the most important, the social communication issues. That's what makes it really autism. And then we have the second set of things. You only need 2 out of the 4. And these are patterns of behavior, right? So when they say stereotyped or repetitive motor movements, I don't know if you remember in Rain Man, you would see Dustin Hoffman's character like doing this with his head over and over and over, or autistic kids will often do things like rock or spin or twirl or open and close the door over and over and over again. These are called stereotyped behaviors. They don't have an obvious purpose. Most people think that their purpose is self-calming, that by doing those things it just kind of calms them down. And they're sometimes called stims or stimulations, self-stimming, just a way to kind of keep yourself grounded. But they can be very disconcerting to look at. Insistence on sameness. So this is something where you'll see a person with autism, and it was kind of funny, like our son would go to preschool and we would say, "How was your day?" And he would say, "I had fun." Every single day he would say, "I had fun." And if we said, "What did you have for lunch?" He would have peanut butter and jelly. I know he didn't have peanut butter and jelly because I didn't pack peanut butter and jelly, but he would say peanut butter and jelly because that was his routine, that's what he said, that's how it went. And you'll see that a lot, needing to maybe touch everything in the room, maybe need to, whatever it might be. The highly restricted, fixated interests that are abnormal in intensity and focus. That's a tough one because how do you know what abnormal really looks like? And I'm going to say, from what I have learned, and this is not gospel, but this is my understanding, if you have a kid who can take an interest, for example, many kids with autism love trains. If they can take that interest and they can say, ooh, I'd like to ride a train, and I'd like to read a book about a train, and I'd like to see a video about a train, and they can expand their interest, then that's not a problem. It's when they have to watch the same video over and over and over and over without really understanding that it's about trains as a group. They just need to see that video. That's where you have that repetitive, constant, over and over and over kind of thing that becomes an issue. And then the sensory input thing. So sensory disorder is something that a lot of people have. It's not specific to autism, but it is so common among people with autism that they put it into the criteria. And what it means is that you either want a lot of or very little of certain kinds of sensory stimulation. So you might see a person with autism who cannot be in bright light. It is physically painful, or loud sounds might be physically uncomfortable to them, or certain kinds of fabrics, all kinds of sensory things might be a problem. Or the other way around, they might want to, like Temple Grandin, who's a very famous PhD on the spectrum, built herself something she called a squeeze machine to give herself the equivalent of giant hugs all the time because she found it calming. She needed all that sensory input. But I'm sure that you guys know people who are not autistic who find loud noise to be overwhelming, or too much heat, too much cold is just too much. It's not only folks on the spectrum. So any questions about this complicated stuff here? So once they said everybody's on the same autism spectrum, of course they realized that, but they're also different from each other. So they created these levels of autism, level 1, 2, and 3. Requiring some support, requiring substantial support, requiring very substantial support. What they mean by that, of course, is that a level 3 person is a person who needs 24/7 care because they can't look after themselves at all. They need to be toileted, they need to be fed, they need everything. Whereas theoretically, a level 1 person can live on their own with no support at all, or very little. The reality is that, like I was saying, like with your 18-year-old granddaughter, yeah, you can perfectly well wash your clothes and cook your dinner and read a book and talk to your mother, but in your own world, you need a lot of help because, our son, for example, can do all of those things and does all of those things, but could he call the doctor, make an appointment, and go to that appointment on time and then interpret the results of the conversation and take action? No. So for all of that kind of thing, he absolutely needs a lot of support. But common sense was that's what these levels are. So if you hear that, yeah.
Back to the beginning when you said that they're usually diagnosed around 3 years old.
Well, they're supposed to, not necessarily diagnosed, but the symptoms are supposed to be evident.
Symptoms, yeah. Now, when you got, say, 5 symptoms, as you age, is there going to be, can there be more?
Yeah. I mean, people change. I think what tends to change, it's an interesting thing. I mean, I will say that for our son, actually, he had a lot of sensory issues and they kind of went away. Mm-hmm. What I personally have seen increase is anxiety. And that because people on the spectrum who are tiny do not really know how other people are looking at them. But if they're fairly high functioning, they start to become more and more aware, and then they start to feel uncomfortable, and they might be bullied and that kind of stuff. But I wouldn't say that you're going to develop a completely new set of symptoms.
Okay. I was thinking of temper tantrums.
Oh, well, yeah.
You know, right now there aren't any. But I know that's one of the first questions the doctor asked is, what are the top tantrums like? And it was, well, he doesn't have any.
Yeah, I know. Just
I wonder
don't have them.
as he ages if that changes.
It could happen. It depends on his circumstances. But it sounds like he's just a mellow kind of guy. You know, autistic meltdowns are fairly common, and when they happen, they can be really hard to manage.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes a kid will get, or an adult even, will get so overwhelmed by their own emotions that they'll run out of the room, or run out of the street, and that's a whole thing. So that's scary, and so you want to make sure you're managing that. But if he doesn't have tantrums, awesome. It's fantastic. Could he develop them? It could happen, sure, but I don't think that would be a symptom so much as just growing up. And that's one of the tougher things, by the way, is, you know, autistic kids, like everybody else, they grow up, and they can be naughty, and they can do things on purpose to be a pain in the neck. They're not perfect people just because they're autistic, so sometimes, you know, it's hard to tell the difference and to really be able to determine, oh, that's happening because he's having sensory overload, or that's happening because he just wants attention and he's being a pain in the neck like any other kid. Because both of those things can happen, you know. Right, okay. Let's go backwards. Boop, boop. Okay. So I made this little chart just to give you a sense of the breadth of this, because there's actually a movement right now, which I'm reading about on LinkedIn, among parents of kids with profound or severe autism, because there's a lot of people now with very high functioning autism who are very capable of speaking for themselves and have groups as adults and speak up on the subject and have a lot to say. And they are sort of saying, and we as a autism spectrum, blah, blah, blah. And the parents are saying, but you're not speaking for my kid. My kid can't even talk. My kid can't even use the toilet. You can't speak for him. And they are working very hard to actually create a new category called profound autism as a separate category for that reason. A lot of those people, so far as we know, if they are not speaking, it is really hard to tell sometimes, unless they learn how to sign or use, type or use some other system for communicating. It's very hard to measure their IQ. As a result, perhaps of that, or perhaps because they really have a very low IQ, most of those people are measured as having, and low IQ is under 70, but a lot of these people are well below that. Some of them can be very aggressive, and some of them can be self-injurious, and it's tough. It's really tough to look after a kid or an adult with those kinds of symptoms. That's not to say they can't get better, but the probability that they're going to live a normal life is pretty slight if they're really suffering from profound autism. Mild autism, I mean, there are people who say Einstein had mild autism. He may have done, or Bill Gates. I mean, obviously you're not talking about people who are not successful. But they're different, right? They may sound a little bit different. They probably are very bright. But they may, and I've noticed this a lot with people who are very high functioning, is they get overwhelmed and their anxiety level goes through the roof. And so they may really, I mean, I've seen, like a brilliant 12-year-old boy just burst into tears because he was overwhelmed. And, that's not the kind of thing you expect a 12-year-old boy to do. But if they're autistic, sometimes it's very hard for them to control their emotions. Or they might blurt a lot in class, the kind of, I know kind of thing, because they know everything there is to know about T-Rex more than anybody in the whole world. Some of them will have learning disabilities, but also could be savants. Executive functioning is a big one. If you have kids on the spectrum, that's the ability to plan and manage your life. So it's the part of your brain in the very front, that, like the executive in a corporation who says, okay, so tomorrow I have these things to do, and therefore I have to be ready at this time, and therefore I have to start preparing at that time. For most people on the spectrum, as well as people with ADHD and other developmental disorders, that's a tough one, and usually need some support. Many people on the autism spectrum do get married and have life partners and have good friends, and many don't. It's a real mixed bag. So what causes it? We don't really know. There's very few things we absolutely know cause autism. There's certain prenatal medications and recreational and medicines that can lead to autism. We know genetics it is genetic, it runs in families. And this is a weird one, it is associated particularly with older fathers. We don't know why. There's a lot of sort of research into that. Those are the three biggest ones that I'm aware of. We do know that vaccines don't cause autism, nor does bad parenting, nor do contrails, dietary issues, too many video games, it rains too much. I mean, the number of things that people are going to throw out there is, you looked at him the wrong way on Tuesday and now he's autistic, it's your fault. No, it doesn't work like that. However, there was a period of time where mothers were blamed for their children's autism. But that is no longer the case because we figured out that Bernard Rimland was mistaken. There's a lot of myths and misunderstandings. Autistic people can't sympathize or empathize with others. Yes, they can. Sometimes they do it too much. However, they may not look like they're doing it. They may look different. They may not laugh when they're supposed to laugh, cry when they're supposed to cry. They may ask the wrong question, boy, how do you feel because your dad just died kind of question. And it's like, how could you ask that? What a terrible thing to ask. I'm not asking it out of meanness. I have seen a lot of empathy and a lot of sympathy among people on the spectrum. I mean, of course, there's being so many, there can be real jerks who don't empathize or sympathize. But again, it's not a symptom of autism. Autistic people tend to have too many feelings, in my opinion. In that they are the kind of people who get very anxious if somebody looks at them funny, or who can get very upset if they feel like they are not being heard, that kind of thing. But also can have be wonderfully loving people as well. And yes, autistic people have plenty of feelings. Bad parenting or neglect cannot cause autism. It obviously doesn't do an autistic kid any good to be neglected or abused. But as you know, there's plenty of kids who have been neglected and abused who are not autistic. It doesn't cause it. It's not. That doesn't work that way. There is no such thing as a cure for autism. There are organizations and people, and you will hear that this will cure it or that will cure it. It doesn't really work that way at this point. There is no thing that will just fix autism. There are many treatments. I'm going to show you some of them, but there is no thing that you can take or do that will just take away the autism. And many people on the spectrum are very proud of their autism and don't want it taken away. There are people with autism who are what is called a savant, which is the Rain Man, where he was able to tell you, exactly how many flights did this, that, and the other on this date and this time. And that's called savant syndrome, and it's what's called a splinter skill, which means that with all that knowledge of Qantas aircraft, he couldn't put that to work for anything else. He couldn't use it. And that's both the up and the downside of being a savant. Some savants, have talents that they can put to use because people around them say, wow, you're a brilliant artist. Let's showcase your work. But they themselves very often don't know what to do with it besides just do what they do. Also, there are a lot of sort of generalities about autistic people, that they're smart, techie, nerdy, antisocial, shy, loud, etc., and many are. A lot of those things. There are many nerdy, techie, antisocial autistic people, and if you've seen Sheldon in Big Bang Theory, that's kind of, But there are many who are very different from that. And I mean, our son has just hosted like his 5th party because he loves hosting parties, But that's not typical. But certainly there are plenty of social autistic people, but their social skills are always going to be a bit compromised. They're going to socialize differently. Well, one person with autism. This is a big quote that people use all the time. One person with autism. And that's the reality. You will find if you get together with other people who have autistic children and you say, well, of course you know how they do X, and that person will look at you and they say they do what? My kid does Y. And it can be very frustrating because you're looking for kind of that tribe, and it can be tough to find it for that reason, that people are so different from each other. The big thing that everybody has in common in autism are social and communication challenges. Those are the big things at any level. They can be high, they can be very high functioning, low functioning. Everybody at some level has social communication challenges. That's what makes them autistic. They may have sensory issues, they may have behavioral challenges, or they may not. They may have these splinter savant skills, they may have intellectual challenges, they may not have any of those things, right? Or they may have one or two. So what makes autism really has to do with communication. It really has to do with the ability to, and the desire to communicate, the ability to communicate, and the ability to communicate. So joint attention is this huge thing. So I'll just pick that picture up because you see how they're looking together at the boat. They are joined together in their exploration of what they are seeing. And and that is tough to build for some kids on the spectrum. You can build it, but getting them to want to communicate with you and to share with you what they have seen and to discuss it with you, that takes some doing. That's one of the tougher things for people on the spectrum. They may love to tell you everything they know, but they may find it very difficult to listen to what you want to say about it or to back and forth about it. And so that's one of the skills that social skills and other therapies works on. Even speech therapy for kids on the spectrum will work on that. So I'm just going to go through these real quick. Signs of autism in young children. Lack of communication in any form. So this is what I was talking about. If you have a kid who is tugging on you and they are pointing and they clearly want the cookies and they want them now and they're letting you know, they're communicating. If you have a kid who's wandering off in the corner and does not look at you or interact with you, they are not communicating. So it doesn't have to be speech. And for, like I was saying, for some kids on the spectrum, using picture boards or signing or other means is a good way to start that process. For our son, one of the weird ones was watching TV and learning how to say what he wanted to say by using phrases from from characters who were saying what he wanted to say, but he couldn't figure out how to say it. So he used their words. The repetitive non-social play, it's like you take the Thomas the Tank Engine toy and you go for 2 hours. He's not really playing. He's just going like this. He's not interacting. He doesn't have a purpose or that kind of thing. Same thing with the speech. If you have somebody who just keeps saying the same words over and over and over again, but isn't actually using it to communicate. Parallel play is when you're playing, like two kids are sitting by each other and they are each playing in the sandbox, but in no way interacting with each other. That's normal for a very young child, but after they're about 3, they should be interacting with other kids in some way, even if they're just running around after each other, like lunatics, as they usually do. The sensory needs we talked about. Unresponsiveness is social overtures, so you say, hi, Johnny, and Johnny walks the other direction. Now, it is perfectly possible that Johnny didn't hear you because he's hard of hearing, and that happens. But if you really get a kid who just doesn't respond over and over and over to your engagement, and they can hear normally, that's an issue. They could suggest autism. And then the stereotypical movements, which look like autism, the rocking and the flapping and that kind of stuff. Any questions about this stuff? Okay. So in older children and teens and adults, people are getting diagnosed now at much older ages because typically they've got a much milder form of autism. And so some of the things that you'll see are they're not quite getting the social cues. Like the rules of the game, like they don't intuit them. You have to actually teach the rules of the game, even though everybody else kind of gets them by watching. It can be very hard for autistic people to get by watching and imitating. They might need to actually be told, yes, you kick the ball into the goal, and when you do that, you get X number of points, even though everybody else already knew it because they had watched. Jokes, puns, sarcasm, and irony can be really hard. They can often be very literal in their speech. Not always, but it can be tough for them to get those things. It's not in the criteria, but a lot of people on the spectrum have difficulty with fine motor, which is like handwriting, and hand-eye coordination. It's rare to find an autistic person who is really good at team sports in particular, because they're not going to get the social cue. Like, I looked at you, that means I'm going to kick the ball and it's going to go over there, kind of stuff. If somebody on the spectrum is going to be good at sports, it's probably not going to have a lot of hand-eye coordination. It might be running or swimming, that kind of thing, golf, but not things where they have to hit a thing that's on the move. It's tough for them. Prosody is how your voice sounds. And many people on the spectrum, they say exactly the same thing as anybody else, but they sound different. And if most people, their ears will immediately tell them there's something off. It's nothing dramatic, but it's kind of like, you meet somebody who's Dutch and they speak perfectly good English, but you know that they're Dutch the second they start talking. It's that kind of thing. They may use language a little differently. A lot of teens in particular on the spectrum are young for their ages, and so they will be interested in stuff that a younger kid would love. They might still be watching little kid TV, although it's much easier now because a lot of teens and even adults are into anime and other forms of cartoons. But you'll find that often they're just young for their age. And they do not have a clue how to flirt or how to, engage. So that gets very complicated as you start to get older because you're not quite sure. Well, she looked at me, she talked to me. Does that mean she's interested in me as a romantic interest? How do I know? And of course, nobody can answer that question. Nobody really knows. It's all very, 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 very subtle. And that's a tough one. The intense and passionate interest in a particular topic or set of topics. I mean, a lot of people with autism, of course, are very into video games, very into anime, very into science fiction, and they know everything there is to know about it. Our son knows everything there is to know about voiceover actors. He just picked it up, and that's his thing. But it doesn't hurt anybody, and, it's kind of interesting. These are some things that could be part of autism, but they could be not part of autism. People who are not autistic and have no developmental disorders have these same things happen to them. So these things in themselves are not enough to say, oh yes, that's autism. Late speech, there are so many different disorders that cause late speech, including no disorder at all, just they learn to talk later. Some people just do. Lack of eye contact, all of these things. Naughty behavior, preferring to be out by yourself, problems making friends. Lots of people have these issues. They often go along with autism, but they're not enough for a doctor to look at those and say, oh, well, if your child likes to be alone and doesn't have a lot of friends, clearly they're autistic. No. That's a personality trait, unless it goes along with some of these other issues I'm talking about. So if you have a grandchild who you think, something's up, I wonder what we should do about it. And my personal take on that is you cannot possibly lose by getting a child or an adult evaluated. The worst that could possibly happen is they say, no, they're fine. And the best that could possibly, and if your child really does have a need, you're going to get services. So there's no reason not to find out. I will say that pediatricians sometimes miss autism in high-functioning kids and adults. We had that happen to us with a pediatrician who was a father of a dear friend of mine, knew my son intimately, and we brought him in because he was having all these issues in preschool. And he said, Tom, would you like a lollipop? And Tom said, yes. And he said, what color would you like? And he said, purple. He said, he's fine. That was back in the 1990s, and things have changed since then. But it is because they only see the kids so briefly. if they are close enough for jazz in that 10 or 15 minutes, that they can miss it. So if you have a kid who you're thinking might have more issues and the pediatrician says, they're fine, and you're still worried, you can always take them to a developmental pediatrician and just, or have them look at them more closely and determine it for sure. Questions about that? Okay, so like I said, there's no cure for autism, but there is no lack of treatments for autism. The list goes on and on and on and on and on. For some kids and adults, all of these things are useful, and for others, not so much. But to very quickly go through it, mostly every kid is going to be offered what's called ABA, or behavioral therapy. This is a type of therapy which has been evolving over the years. There's lots of different kinds of it now. It used to be something very kind of draconian, where they would sit the kid down for 40 hours a week and tell them that they had to say certain words and they would get a prize. It has become much more innovative since then. It is offered in the schools, it's offered everywhere. And basically the purpose of it is to teach a kid how to behave more typically. That's really the purpose of it. Developmental therapy, which is my very favorite thing in the world, it's a form of play therapy, the purpose of which is to help the child learn how to communicate in a back and forth reciprocal way, and then build the skills of symbolic thinking and playing and engagement. And we started doing this through a program called Floor Time, which I love and highly recommend if you have young kids, because it's so much fun.
What is it?
It's called Floor Time. Floor Time, as in you get down on the floor and you play. But the purpose, so you're doing things like this, like you've got this kid and they've got their Thomas the Tank Engine, right? And they're going, rah, 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 and you put your hand there. So it goes, bonk. And they get frustrated. And so they have to tell you in some way to move your hand. And you want me to move my hand? Okay, I can move my hand. I moved it, went back down again. What are you going to do now? And it pushes the kid into having to recognize you and engage with you. And as you start doing it more and more and more, you can make it more and more and more interesting with puppets and different kinds of pretend play. And then we sort of created a monster, and now our son owns the entire basement and is creating this humongous model world. And his poor dad over there had to finish the entire basement just to create the model world for Tom, so that he could keep, building and showing what he's building. But it's really fun. I highly recommend it. For some kids, medical therapy can be helpful. There are supplements that some kids, they're helpful for some, drugs that can help you calm down if you're anxious, if you're depressed, if you're this or you're that. There is no pill for autism. Speech therapy is a given. They will offer it to any kid in school, and they should have it, because even if they can talk, they probably are going to need help with using language socially and appropriately. Occupational therapy, often in school they're going to work on handwriting and grasping, but occupational therapy therapists also do a lot of play therapy and social skills therapy. They're a very diverse group, and you might find one that you love to pieces. Physical therapy, as I said, even though it's not in the criteria, so many kids on the spectrum cannot really play games properly, don't have the right kind of physical coordination. So they wind up with adaptive gym, where they're learning how to do those things that other kids might be able to do just by watching and imitating. Social skills therapy. So this is a big one also you can see in school. It's a tool for literally teaching everything from scripts, like, okay, Johnny, you walk into a room and there's your teacher, and what do you say? Say hi. And then sort of, okay, and you say, hi, my name is Johnny, so let's practice that. Hi, my name is Johnny, that kind of thing. And literally, because for people on the spectrum, imitation is really tough. They're not watching the people around them for clues about how to behave. So that doesn't mean they don't want to behave like other people, but that's not how they learn it. So they need to actually be taught. This is what you do. When you walk into a room, you say X. When you shake hands, you do Y. That type of thing. It's direct instruction, and it can be super helpful. Art therapies, Drama in particular is great, but art therapy, music therapy, all of these can be helpful in working on emotions. And we ran into this funny situation, which was our son wanted to learn to play the clarinet when he was about 8, and we could only find music therapists, but no music instructors who wanted to work with him. So we had to go out and search the world for somebody who would work with him. And now he plays in the town band. And his dad's the MC. And the really cool thing is that he was the MC. He wasn't the MC when Tom got started in the band. He got started as MC because Tom was in the band. So that was cool. And it took a long time for him to learn all the ins and outs, if you want to talk about it.
Oh. So, I'm Peter Cook. So, just briefly about music. Tom started with music and watching videos and hearing different pieces and all that. And so we decided, we tried different things, tried music therapists, and they didn't really want to teach him how to use an instrument, but he got interested in the instruments by seeing them. And then we lived in Philadelphia, so I started taking him to family concerts at the Philadelphia Orchestra. And there wasn't a whole lot of conversation between he and I, but he became fascinated watching these people do these things with their fingers and their hands. And he is not a savant when it comes to music at all. This is something that's taken thousands of hours and money to make this happen and find people that believed in him to do it. And to get him to the place where he is right now, in town band, he plays third clarinet in the band. That took over a decade worth of work and finding people that could actually get him to that place. And he's not perfect, and he's not the soloist or anything like that. But it's something that he's worked on and we've worked on. And side benefits to it, he's become more social. Other band members talk to him. He talks to them. Sometimes he talks about things they really don't want to talk about, like toys or things like that, because they're all adults. But they recognize his differences, and he's becoming accepted into the group. So socially, it's been a huge benefit. I tell him things like, I'm the MC of the band. I have fun telling history about the band and music and all that. But I said, Tom, one of the most important things about being part of this band is we show up early, we set up the chairs and the stands, we stay till the lights go off, and we put everything away. So it's more than just playing music. It's actually getting integrated into the group.
But he would not have seen, what Tom would not have done if he was there all by himself, he would not have seen, everybody's getting up, they are folding their chairs, they are bringing them over, I should do the same. That wasn't he didn't want to. It never occurred to him until his dad said, here's what we do. Now he does it for everybody else. Yeah. But it wouldn't have occurred to him because he is autistic and he doesn't see and imitate. He learns and he does.
And that took 6 years to get to that place where he can do it. I don't have to say anything. I just show up and I do my thing and set up my stuff. And he's over there working with other band members setting up stuff. Before that, it was sort of like Tom just sort of standing, not sure what to do. It's like, go ask us, go help, or I'll help him set up stands and chairs and things like that. But it took 6 years to get to that place. So it's constant reinforcing, constantly, and willing to put the time in.
It's worth it. It's worth it. Oh, yep. My goodness. He's got what? I mean, so thanks, Pete. Yeah.
Is there any correlation between the age of the child and their receptivity to the various therapies you're talking about? When we raised our children, we were taught that the first 5 or 6 years of their life, they're soaking it up much faster than they learn beyond that. Is there any correlation? It's something similar?
So, it's an interesting question, and I don't have the absolute answer to it. I'm not a neurologist. I would say that certainly you're right that the very youngest children, their brains are more plastic and they are taking in more information faster. But all I can tell you is that I have never seen a point at which our son stopped learning or growing. There has not been a plateau. There have been times where he has developed more slowly. And what I've also seen, and I don't know if this is typical at all, but what I've seen is like when most kids or people will develop a skill kind of like that. What I've seen with him is that he'd be like this, and then nothing, and then boom, another like developmental spurt. And I mean, I was shocked the other day when he said, I checked the weather and it looks like it's going to rain on Thursday, so I'm not sure if we're going to have town band. Which meant that he was thinking, okay, I have a plan. I know what the plan is. I need to check the weather. I know how to check the weather. I know what checking the weather means. I know what the outcome's going to be. And if the outcome is that it's going to rain, I'm not going to go to town band, and that's okay. I don't mind that. And he had done all of that, and I thought of none of that. I was like, oh, okay. And then I went, oh. And I mean, I don't think a year ago he could have done that. Do you, Peter?
No, not at all.
We didn't teach it to him. He just figured it out. I think people just keep learning. But what I also think is that there's an enormous focus on teaching very young children. And even the parents start to think, oh, well, I've done my thing. He's 6 years old. He's going to kindergarten. If he hasn't made it by now, I guess he's not going to make it. My personal opinion, based on my experience, is that that's a lot of nonsense. And that people continue, all of us do, right? I mean, just to grow and to learn. If you provide the support and you provide the tools, people continue to grow. But there are certain things I believe that, and I'd have to look it up, to do with specifically speech, the ability to talk, that kind of thing. I think that at a certain point, it's much less likely that they're going to become able to use spoken language, but I don't know the details. That's more of a neurological issue. So then there's these autism-specific therapies that are interesting. There's various different kinds. One's called RDI. They're different forms of ABA and play therapy, and there's something that a guy down in Rhode Island does called SCIRTS, which is a particular type of therapy used in school settings. There's a lot of very interesting ones that have kind of elements of behavioral and developmental therapy in them that are used in specific ways in specific settings. And there's a ton of them. They're not terribly different from each other, but the people who have created them are very proud of them. So you can get their book. And then talk therapy. Talk therapy is much more likely to be used for people who are high functioning, and obviously they can talk. And it's used because they have feelings and they need to get through their feelings. It's not going to change their autism, but if they're having issues with anxiety, as many do, or depression, as quite a few do, or other issues, that's what the talk therapy is for. It's not to cure the autism, but it's, yeah.
Can I go back to the medical therapy, drugs, supplements, and diet? What kind of stuff do they do on the diet? Do they cut out, is it gluten-free? What do they do?
Yeah,
think about that.
So GFCF, gluten-free and casein-free, right? There's been a ton of research into it. There seem to be, and again, this is just based on the writing that I've done, I'm not an expert. There seem to be an unusual number of people on the spectrum who have gastrointestinal issues. And those issues, particularly in young children, can translate into bad behavior. And so you think the kid is having bad behavior, and it turns out they're always in pain. And a lot of those kids do seem to do better on either gluten-free or casein, which is lactose, milk-free diets. There are also a couple of other diets that because they seem to have very sensitive stomachs and sometimes have gut issues, that it can really make a big difference.
So what I want to know is, if my grandson, he's 6, he likes to eat sweet things, and I'm just wondering if that's affecting his autism at all.
It could be making him hyper, but I think the thing you would be looking at would be more likely the dyes in the candies.
Oh, okay, like red.
Yeah. But if it were me and I was concerned, I might talk to a nutritionist or a dietitian who has a background in this. But yeah, I mean, food, it's amazing. The gut really does have a strong connection to the brain. So yeah, I mean, if you're concerned about it, it's definitely worth exploring. It may not make any difference at all, but you never know. Yeah. As I said, I've done enough research on that topic to be able to say that, yeah, like almost 20% of people on the spectrum have stomach issues of one sort or another, or gastro stuff going on. So there are these crazy people who you've probably heard of, like Jenny McCarthy, who will tell you all kinds of crazy stuff to do for your child with autism or grandchild with autism, and you will cure them by doing these terrifying things. Don't do that, please. If you're treating a specific issue, then medicine is appropriate or a special diet is appropriate. If you are not, anybody who tells you they've got a medicine or thing, take this pill, do this thing, and you will cure your child's autism. They're selling you snake oil. Chelation. So this is when, back in the 2000s, there was this belief that heavy metals in vaccines were causing autism. This has been proven over and over and over and over and over to be false. However, many, many parents believe it to be true and were using these medicines called chelators, which are intended to remove lead from the body if you have lead poisoning. And they can be very effective for that, but they are supposed to be used in a medical setting because of lead poisoning. And so it was pretty risky and continues to be risky. Bleach therapy? There are people using bleach. I don't know what that's even about. HBOT, that's hyperbaric oxygen. It's like if somebody has the bends, they put them in this chamber. Somebody came up with a theory that this was going to cure autism. It's not going to hurt anybody, but it certainly is unlikely to cure anything related to autism, though it does wonders for the bends. Facilitated communication, this is a weird one. It's not the only, there's several treatments or approaches to communicating with nonverbal people that involve typing. There are people who are nonverbal who can type and communicate, but there are also people with autism who are nonverbal, and they use this thing where somebody stands over them and puts their hands on their hands, and then they type. And if you've ever seen a Ouija board work, it's a very questionable thing. Is this person communicating, or is the person with their hand on their hand communicating? I wouldn't recommend it. Some people swear by it. It's just hard for me to believe that it's for real. Halo is similar to that. And then special diets, if they're not medically needed, if you wind up with kids with autism, hang on one second, I'm calling it 1 second, but kids with autism in general, partly because of their sensory issues, partly because they like routine, and partly because they're little kids, eat very few foods. They can be extremely picky eaters. And if you then restrict their diet even more and say, well, okay, all you eat is chicken fingers, but I'm not going to let you eat them because they have white flour on them, now they're eating nothing. So you have to be really careful about that. Be really careful with the special diets if you have a kid who's that picky, because if they're not eating anything, they're not getting nutrition, then all the special diets in the world are just going to make them sick. Do you know what I mean? I'm sorry, you were going to ask a question?
Well, just about that, my grandson was eating hamburgers and french fries was from 90% of his diet, and you cannot get him to eat a vegetable if you threaten him with death.
Peter has an answer to you. But yes.
So our son, when he was young, ate basically 3 things. Pizza, bagels, with cream cheese, which actually... what was the third?
Peanut butter and jelly, but he always ate fruit.
Those were the only things he ever ate. And it took from
and yogurt.
Yeah, every family is different, every approach is different, so don't take mine that ours was gospel or anything like that. But it took forever to try for new food, and he would get very angry and say, no new foods. But it took persistence over and hundreds and hundreds of times to do it with him. Now, every kid can react differently to this, so he can do this. But it takes a lot of work to do it, and sometimes you get creative. Sometimes you sneak it in something else, or you present it a different shape or color or something like that. But
you worry that they're being nutritionally deprived.
Right.
Yeah, and they are.
Potassium.
To a degree, they are.
Do you recommend them getting supplements in that case?
Well, I not being a medical doctor, I cannot recommend that kind of thing, but what I can recommend is that there is such a thing as a feeding therapist, and there are dietary therapists who specialize in exactly this kind of thing. What I can't guarantee is that whatever they do is going to translate from their space to your space. There's a lot of literature out there for ways to try just as there is with toilet teaching, which can also be very, very tough. is, you can definitely try with the food therapist. It's hard. It's really hard.
Have you found with your son that he has any nutritional problems because that?
As a little
very
boy,
diet?
he ate virtually, he ate so much fruit and so little anything else that he had diarrhea.
Yeah.
Now, and I don't even know what it was that made him go, oh, I'll have a hamburger, I'll have a bacon burger. Like 6 months ago, suddenly he was eating bacon burgers, which he'd never touched in his life. He just decided. But yeah, so at this point his diet is, the sort of very straightforward American diet. He'll eat meat and rice and he'll eat broccoli. An occasional Brussels sprouts.
That's a biggie, broccoli.
Oh, I know, right?
I'm impressed.
So, but yeah, it's, it can be a real struggle. And I will definitely, see if you can find a nutritionist or a feeding specialist who's willing to work with you on tricks and techniques. Right. Okay. So you've got this young child. You have a young child who may have autism, even if they only have some of the symptoms. Even if they have late speech, if they have some difficulties with sensory issues, you will very likely get early intervention. And early intervention is a set of programs, therapies and preschool for kids with any kind of developmental issues. And they are provided free of charge, and you get them. When they get a little bit older, everything is provided through the school district. Are you guys familiar with IEPs? Yes, no, a little bit? So the IEP, which is the Individualized Educational Plan, if you have a kid who is diagnosed with autism, they will pretty much automatically get one. And it includes goals specific to your child and techniques and accommodations specific to your child. So in the classroom. So they might include having a one-on-one support staff person assigned to your child. They might include having a speech therapist working with your child in or outside of the classroom. They might include, pre-teaching, let's say, for a kid who, and this is quite common, where you have a kid who is bright enough to do the schoolwork, but doesn't keep up with the class because they're not translating the language into meaning fast enough. So they're hearing the words and they'll hear something like, okay, everybody, turn to page 14 in your reader, and then he's heard, okay, kids, turn. And he missed the whole rest of it. So it's not that he couldn't do the reading or that he couldn't understand the content, but they're going too fast because his language processing skills are compromised. So sometimes they'll do something like pre-teach, like they'll have somebody sit down with him ahead of time and say, we're going to be looking at this book and this story, let's look at the story. So that he's ready. When the general education class meets, he's already on top of it and he can participate with everybody else. So that kind of thing. Adaptive gym, sometimes. There's just a whole range of things. In some cases, they will recommend a different setting from the typical school. And that depends on the kid. They want to keep every kid in the regular school, but what we found, interestingly enough, is that Falmouth has great programs for kids with learning disabilities, great kids for kids who are severely disabled, but Tom was smack in the middle. And so he was beyond the very special ed program, but he wasn't up to the sort of remedial reading where everybody is going to pass the MCAS at some point. He was right in the middle, and that was very frustrating. And I wound up homeschooling him for a little while, but in the long run, he went to the Riverview School in Sandwich for quite a while as well, which caters specifically to that middle band of kids. So that was kind of neat. So the IEP process can be very stressful because you are constantly hearing about all the things that are wrong with your child. And what happens is that you go into this meeting and you say, but he's so good at math. And they go, yeah, so we don't have to talk about that because that's not on the IEP. What's on the IEP is all the things he's not good at. And so you just spend all the time with these people talking about what's wrong with your kid. And it can be very demoralizing. But also that the plan that the school has for your child may not be what you want. And different families have different ideas about what's best for their child. So some will say, I want my child included in general education, and the other parent will say, I want my kid in a specialized class. The kids are very similar, but the parents have different philosophies. And so that gets complicated. Okay. This is something I'm going to be talking a lot more about. But once they get to the age of 22, they get a whole different set of services through the state, paid for by the Department of Developmental Services and mostly implemented by agencies. And here, Capabilities is one of them, Life is one of them, there's a couple of others. Because we are in the state of Massachusetts, they have passed a bill called the Autism Omnibus Bill, which says that no matter what your intelligence is, if you are autistic, you get services. Because it used to be if you had an IQ over 70, you would get no services at all. And they finally understood that autism was not necessarily related to IQ, that you could have a lot of disabilities and still have a high IQ. So they did that, which is awesome. So some services are available. What is not available is housing. They will not provide a person with an IQ over 70 with free housing, which from our point of view is just as well, because I don't think we'd want that, but for some people it can be tough. But Tom gets employment support and coaching, social activities, he does volunteering, he has a one-on-one person who comes once a week to help work with him in his apartment that he has above our garage. And then depending on, he doesn't get these, but you can get, and many people do get, behavioral interventions, psychological stuff. Sometimes you can get some home services. There's a lot of different things that DDS provides depending upon the need of the individual and the severity of their situation and so forth. So that's what happens after 22. So parenting. So you are the grandparents of parents. You're the parents of parents who are very tired and probably confused and probably lonely, because one of the weird things about autism, and every time you have a kid with any disability, is that you are not part of that great parent club where you go, and we're all together because we're all soccer parents or band parents or this parents, or it's like, no. And you're a special needs parent. And what does that mean? Well, everybody's different. There's really not a lot of solidarity. So you're kind of pushed to the side. Plus, for many parents, it's tough to get a babysitter. For a kid with autism, it can be tough to go anywhere with a kid when you don't know whether they're going to suddenly run out of the room or yell or act weird. So all of those things can make you very lonely. But there are also a lot of positives, as Peter and I have been talking about, and some ways you find yourself going, wow, I never would have noticed with a typical kid that he's able to figure out what the weather's going to be. Would you ever think to yourself, wow, my kid figured out what the weather's going to be, isn't that cool? And it's like, you don't think about it, but it's really cool. You see these things happen. He gave a eulogy for a cat. It was the most beautiful eulogy. I mean, we didn't ask him to. He just decided he wanted to. It's amazing. So, parents may have any of these and many, many other feelings, but these are just some of the things that people do feel. There's always this, what did I do wrong? Even though you know intellectually you didn't do a damn thing. People feel embarrassed, and you think, oh, I shouldn't feel embarrassed, but I do feel embarrassed because my kid is weird. Anxious because you're going to get that phone call from the teacher or anybody else. You send them to Cub Scouts and you just know you're going to get that call. I'm sorry, your kid cannot be in Cub Scouts. You're worried about his future, and you're angry because people either don't get your kid, or they're doing the wrong thing, or they're just, or unreasonably hopeful, which is also a problem when you have somebody say, he'll be fine. He'll be fine. He'll be like everybody else. And the truth is, if your kid is autistic, they're going to be different. That doesn't make them worse, but they're going to be different, and that's just how it's going to be. And that, being okay with that can take a really long time. So, this is for you guys. So, things that you guys can do to help, right? Time, respite care. Saying, okay, well, I can be at home with the other kids while you go to that IEP meeting. Yes, I will take him out because you need a little time to yourself, that kind of thing. Money. If it's not provided by the school or by insurance, it will be expensive. I mean, if you've taken any kind of therapy, you know, cognitive therapy, anything, it's going to cost. And in many cases, it's worth the money, but a lot of parents are short on money because they're struggling because they've got a kid on, you know, who's got special needs. Uncritical support, which is to say, not, you know what you should do, but rather just saying, I'm here. What do you need? Informed advice and resources. So this is like, you need, like, you're here tonight learning. And if you come, I mean, if you just say, you know, a friend of my friend has a grandkid who got cured of autism because he ate, you know, the blah, 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 the tree of the who's this, it's not very helpful. However, if you really know something and you can bring something to the table and you can say, and I can help with that, you know, I think maybe we can find a feeding therapist and I can help you to do that. I can look into that if you'd like me to. That can be super helpful. Same thing with providing and researching therapies. Okay, so the family members, right? Okay, so you've got this autistic kid at the family gathering at Thanksgiving and everybody's like, what's wrong with him? And either that or they got advice or they've got a criticism, well, you shouldn't do it this way, you should be doing it that way. Grandparents can be very, very helpful in those circumstances, depending on your particular situation, either to prep other family members to say, this is what it's like, and this is what it's going to be like for little Johnny, and he's going to, you know, I've got a room set up for him, and no, it's not for all the other kids, and that's okay. Or whatever it might be, that any way that you can help to make it possible for your kids to be part of the extended family without feeling like they're constantly on trial is amazing. Ordinary stuff that sometimes just gets lost. You know, do you need a casserole? You know, I know you've been running around after the kids like crazy, and you've been going to therapies, and you've been going to IEP meetings. Would you like, you know, want some takeout? Just little stuff, anything that can help. And the other thing is the siblings, because very often when you have an autistic child in the family, they get an enormous amount of attention, which can be very hard on their brothers and sisters. Grandparents can really make a difference there as well, just simply by saying, okay, you're going to therapy and the other kids are coming with me for ice cream. And just being that person who says, come on, you know, let's go do something special. That doesn't require mom or dad to be there, can really be wonderful. Any other advice to each other would be great. You guys have any further thoughts? Yeah.
So my son is 31 years old, originally diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. So what you presented tonight is, I wish I had heard it years ago. It's really valuable.
Oh, good.
In our experiences, my wife and I have done a lot over the years with the Asperger's Autism Network of New England.
Hold that thought.
Okay, I figured you were going to go there.
I am, yeah. There it is. Yeah, so I got a lot of tips and tools, and feel free to throw anything in here that people might not know about. So the Autism Asperger's Association or Network, whatever it is in New England, they're big. Unfortunately, they're all the way up in Watertown, which is a pain in the neck, but they do have some programs here. And they offer things for adults and for kids and for parents, and it runs the gamut from support groups to social skills groups to, well, you know more about it maybe than I do.
You're hitting on it.
Okay. I tell people just say yes. It may sound really weird, and I actually said no to a special needs preschool, and it was maybe not the smartest thing I ever did. We certainly spent a lot more money than we needed to, and it feels, I mean, try it. The worst that could happen is it's not a great match. If it is a great match, that's wonderful. If it's not, just don't do it anymore. But saying no to things before you try them, because you think you know the kid, probably not the best idea. If it's possible, teach your kid how to do regular stuff. Very often an autistic kid spends so much time in therapy that nobody ever thinks that they should learn how to swim, or that they should learn how to kick a ball, or that they should learn how to play a musical instrument, or any of the regular stuff. Yes, Pete?
I'll throw one in here too. This doesn't work for every kid or family, but you know how we say that there's some kids who like things that are predictable, this happens and this happens, this happens. I thought about this, and I took a risk with Lisa, with our son. And again, it may not work for every kid, but we decided once in a great while to throw in a curveball to say he's used to doing this over and over and over and over and over and over again. Say, well, today we're not going to do that. We're going to go do something else. And at first, that was like disaster. But over time, working into his life, that little tip has helped him cope with changes.
We taught him how to say the words, oh well.
Yeah. It took a long time to get to. But it's
And mean it.
Yeah. But that kind of tip helps to sort of teach them, like, this is what ordinary life is like. It's not always predictable.
Sometimes the balloon goes up into the air and you can't get it back, and it stinks. Oh well. You know. So teaching, this is again a thing that grandparents absolutely can do, is work on some of those life skills. And honestly, some of these are the skills, if you think about it, teaching a kid how to be an amazing first grader is absolutely useless next year. But teaching a kid how to swim will be useful for their entire lives. As we're learning how to bowl, as we're learning how to, ride a bike. I mean, all the regular, ordinary things that kids do that they translate into adulthood are going to be even more important for your autistic grandchild, because it is such a struggle to go from kindergarten to grade 1 and grade 1 to grade 2. And so having those skills that just make them regular like everybody else, when somebody says we're having a swim party and they go, great, I can swim, is amazing. And that's definitely a place that grandparents can make a big difference. Listening to the experts. So you will hear over and over again, oh, well, parents are the experts on their children and they're trying to be respectful. But what I have learned over time is that although we are very good with our son, there are other people in the world who are even better with him, and are because they know, some people are just intuitively great. They just are. Like the guy at the YMCA who, when our son was sitting there at the swim class dipping his hair into the water, watching it drip, when all the other kids were learning how to swim. And he said, come on, Tom, you're going to stand between Billy and Sam right here. Okay. He put his hand on Tom's head and he said, jump. And Tom jumped because everybody else was jumping. We wouldn't have thought of that. We would have looked at him dripping his hair and thinking, he'll never learn. He learned. Sometimes people just know. I recommended floor time specifically. The reason I recommend it is this. The guy who invented floor time, the play therapy I was telling you about, his name was Stanley Greenspan. He was a child psychologist. He is the only person I ever heard use the word joy and autism in the same sentence. Anybody who does that is a hero in my book. He was an amazing guy. And it's just fun. It's just a good way to bond with your grandchild while also building skills. Understanding that your grandkid may not enjoy, there's sort of this understanding that everybody really wants the same thing after all. Every kid wants to go to birthday parties. Every kid wants to be part of the team. Every kid wants to be in the group. And a lot of kids with autism really would rather not. And it's not because they are mean or hateful or whatever, but being in a large group of kids who are all socializing in very complicated and unpredictable ways while shrieking at the top of their lungs is not everybody's cup of tea. It's okay. It doesn't have to be their cup of tea. With Tom, his cup of tea was going with his father to the art museum and looking at the Van Gogh paintings. I mean, that was his thing. And it confuses people, but that's okay. They can be confused. Finding their areas of strength, you've heard us talk about that with Tom, with music and other things. With the IEP meetings, they're going to do nothing but tell you what's wrong. Every single kid has strengths. And again, as grandparents, you know what that kid's strengths are. If you can build on them and help them to build those skills, everybody's going to go, I had no idea that kid could do that. He can sing. He can draw a picture. Because nobody asks them to. Nobody says, can you draw a picture? It doesn't occur to them because they're autistic. They're like, well, if he can't get through Walmart, how the heck is he going to ever learn how to draw? Well, they have nothing to do with each other. Give them the opportunity, Keep good records. I failed. The other thing is, you'll hear people telling you, oh, my kid did blah, 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 and suddenly they blossomed and now you would never know they were ever autistic. Or whatever it might be. Or such and such a therapist is God's gift to humanity and your child will bloom under that person and your kid might not. And it can drive you nuts. But everybody's going to be different, and the fact that somebody else had an experience doesn't mean that you will or won't. And the same goes backwards, just because our kid had a great time in town band doesn't mean your kid will. It's just very idiosyncratic. So this is really advice for parents. Just really taking care of the parent will really help to take care of the child. And a parent who is tearing their hair out and running around like a loon is not going to be a very effective parent. And again, this is a place where grandparents can really just take a little bit of that, just take away the one that's taking over the top and just lower the anxiety just by making one thing a little easier. These are some things that I have done. That's a book I wrote. This book I wrote because I thought, oh, everybody's going to want to take their kids out into the community and have a grand time, and here's how to do it. And everybody went, no, I'm not interested. But it's worth it. There are lots of articles on the website called Very Well Health, and then I created a website about autism in the museum because I do a lot of community inclusion. And, whoa, there was something else that I had there, and now I don't. So that's odd. Oh, well, what I wanted to tell you, because that really is the end, what I wanted to tell you is this. I will be doing another talk, like the 10th? Yeah, in early October, and it's specific to the needs of kids and adults with autism as they start to get into their older teen and adult years. So it will be a talk that focuses on things like, is guardianship right for this kid? How do I create it? Make sure they have enough money. What kinds of services are available? How, those types of things that you might be interested in for your grandchild for the long term. So I'll be addressing that. Again, I'm not an expert, but I've been at it for a while. So, other questions that anybody has?
Can you go back a few slides?
Yeah. Where am I? I'm sort of in the middle of things, aren't I? Let's see, where would you like to go? Which one are you looking for? Tips. This one?
Thank you.
Sure. Sorry about that. Any other questions? Yeah.
Is the PowerPoint available? Will that be available? I came in late.
I know what I hadn't even thought about printing it, but I can make it available for Sue.
I can email it. Even a link to.
I'll get a copy to Sue Hankin, who is the person in the back of the room who's in charge of programs here.
Okay.
I didn't even think about printing it, which I probably should have done. Sorry about that.
But even if we can get a link to your.
Yeah, I don't have it online right now. I can put it online, but and I can let Sue know.
All right.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
Tell us about your camp.
Oh, so this was a whole thing. So when Tom was, I don't know, about 8 or for a while they'll give your kids summer programs at the school, which are just so. And we really wanted to have a summer camp experience, and none of the camps in our area were willing to accept him. And they sort of were saying, well, we'll do something at the end of the summer that'll cost twice as much. And what I did was I went to the Y. I'm a big Y supporter. I used to do fundraising for Ys, and they are amazing institutions. And I asked them if they would be willing to create a program within their day camp for kids on the spectrum, and they said, sure, which was incredible. So I worked with them, and basically what we did was we created, all we did was say, okay, so, how you have like all the different groups of kids at different ages, and we just created one that was called Camp Outlook, was the name of it. It was just one group within the day camp, and they hired a few extra staff, and we raised money to pay for that. And they weren't necessarily therapists, they were just, counselors. And we gave them their own space and a couple of tools like, noise-canceling headphones and tents that they could go into if they just needed a little time to themselves. And they basically did almost everything that the other campers did, but they did it with more support and in some cases at different times. So they went into the pool, for example, at different times so that it wasn't so crowded and crazy and more time and attention could be spent. But they also went on field trips. But they had extra people. Basically, the gist was extra people. The only big issue was because when you create a program for kids with autism, you always have to ask the question, which kids with autism? Because it's such a spectrum that, that if one program isn't going to fit all. But the why being the why, they wanted to include everybody. So we just made a rule that said, if your child cannot follow spoken instruction or use the toilet independently, they have to have a support person with them. And that way they could be included, but it wasn't on the counselors to make sure that they were where they needed to be and that their bottoms were clean and so on. And a few kids did come with support because that was provided through the school district for one reason. In one way or another, they were able to negotiate it. So that's what we did. And it's still running.
Is it in Pennsylvania?
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to have a Y here soon, and I'm hoping we can do the same thing here. It'd be very cool. Yeah.
Has some been able to develop over these years friends, like one or two they'll call and want to be with?
So here's the thing. So he was really antisocial as a little kid, and then he became a bit more social in high school, but struggled with it. And now as an adult, it's really interesting. He is so much happier being an adult and having his own space. And he was sort of doing okay with capabilities, but having gone to the Riverview School, he had met all these kids who were involved with a program called Life, Living Independently Forever, which is another agency here on the Cape. So he started doing, we just decided we would work with them. And he has decided that life is for living, and all of these people are his dear friends, and he goes out every Wednesday night and does all kinds of stuff with them, and he wants to have parties, and we invite them over, and he went to a pool party earlier this year. Now, I cannot say that he's not saying, you are my friend, and I want to connect with you. He's like, this is my group, and I do things with the group, and and the thing about Tom, we're very, very lucky in that he's at a level where he can engage and talk and participate, but he's not so high functioning that he looks at this group and says, well, I don't need that kind of special group. So he's like in that sweet spot. But there's quite a few people in that sweet spot. And he's really happy. He's got more of a social life than many people, including sometimes us.
What I've been witnessing is people that they want friends, but a lot of the parents are afraid of two or three of them being together and being rockers, whatever. So it's hard to get the parents to agree.
Oh, no question. And parents can be this is one of the things that I've been struggling with museums is, I want inclusion in the sense that, our son is now, he can go to a museum and enjoy it with anybody else. And that's what I'm hoping for. But what tends to happen is that they'll create these autism days or autism mornings that are sort of like these segregated times. And the big reason is that that's what the parents want.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to feel embarrassed.
Right.
And that's, I think, one of the big reasons why my book didn't sell. We tried to, create some tools, but parents didn't want that. They just wanted it done, just wanted a program that would take the kid and make them, give them whatever it was. But it takes, like people say, just do it again, and make it a little more, and a little more, and a little more. And that's a lot. It's a lot. And you sort of have to decide that you want to, what's important, and then just do it, But with making friends, I think that it is tough for people with autism to do a traditional buddy kind of thing, like you're my friend, I'm your friend, we hang out. Not to say that nobody with autism does that, because a lot of people do, but it's hard.
Yeah.
But operating within a group seems to be a lot easier, and certainly very possible. And it also helps if you are able to, if you have a kid or an adult who has a particular area where they're good at it. You know, I mean, Tom can be part of the town band because he can play the clarinet.
And he can read music.
And you can read music.
Those are the two requirements for town band.
In case any of you plays an instrument.
When we take it as an adult, there's no other. And in order to be accepted in the band, he had to read music and be able to play the instrument.
Wow, well, that's amazing.
Right, but
Yeah.
but if you have a kid who, for example, knows how to build a model rocket, they can join the model rocket club, and then they're part of that group. Will they become best bosom buddies with other members? Possibly not, but they will find a group of people with whom they can share an interest. In terms of girlfriends, the only way that I think Tom will ever have a girlfriend is the way he had it at Riverview, where the girl would go, you're mine. And that worked pretty well until these were girls who had Down syndrome, and what I learned is that people with Down syndrome tend to be very social, and she said that these girls were like, so when are we getting married? And Tom said, I don't think so. So far, you know, he'll say, I want a girlfriend, and I say, well, first you have to go out on a date, and he goes, right. So that's as far as that's gotten, but that doesn't mean that's as far as it will go, and we'll see. But yeah.
Wow. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.